Marcus Blackwood stood frozen at his mansion's gym doorway, watching a stranger guide his daughter through tennis drills with infectious laughter echoing through the room. The first genuine joy he'd heard in his home since his wife died 3 years ago. And something twisted painfully in his chest, as he realized this woman had accomplished in one afternoon what he'd failed to do in 1,000 days. "Thank you very much, and let's continue." Black coffee at exactly 6:30. Financial reports spread across his mahogany desk by 7, and the familiar weight of grief sitting heavy on his shoulders as he surveyed his empire from the 42nd floor of Blackwood Industries. At 42, he commanded a technology conglomerate worth $3 billion, yet he felt emptier than the day he'd started with nothing but ambition and a borrowed suit. 3 years had passed since the accident that took Elena, his wife of 15 years, and with her, every ounce of joy he'd ever known. The man who once filled rooms with booming laughter and spontaneous weekend adventures had become a ghost haunting his own life, going through the motions of existence while his heart remained buried beside the woman who'd been his everything. His daughter Sophia, now 16, had borne the brunt of his emotional withdrawal. Once a vibrant child who danced through their home with Elena's same infectious energy, she'd grown quiet and distant, matching her father's cold demeanor. Their conversations had dwindled to logistics, school schedules, dinner preferences, obligatory check-ins that felt more like business transactions than father-daughter bonding. How could he laugh when she couldn't? How could he feel joy when the love of his life lay cold in the ground? So he worked 18-hour days, buried himself in acquisitions and board meetings, and convinced himself that providing financial security was enough fatherly love for any child. That Tuesday morning brought an unexpected disruption to his carefully controlled routine. Mrs. Chen, their longtime housekeeper, knocked on his office door with unusual urgency. Her weathered face carried concern as she twisted her hands in her apron, a gesture Marcus had learned to recognize as the precursor to difficult conversations. "Yesterday, I found her crying in her room again. She won't tell me why, but I think she's struggling more than she lets on. Is there a problem at school?" "Not your money, not this big house. She needs you." He'd heard similar observations from school counselors, family friends, even his own mother during their stilted phone conversations. But hearing it from Mrs. Chen, who'd watched Sophia grow from a giggling toddler into this hollow-eyed teenager, made it impossible to ignore. "What would you suggest?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe she needs something to bring back that spark." It had been their special time, mother and daughter bonding over shared athleticism while Marcus played enthusiastic spectator. "Sir, perhaps you could—" He'd provide Sophia with the best tennis instruction money could buy, but he wouldn't torture himself by watching her play the sport that had been Elena's passion. Marcus glanced through them with the same efficiency he applied to executive hiring decisions. All had impressive credentials: former professionals, prestigious coaching certifications, glowing recommendations from wealthy clientele. He was about to select the most expensive option when Mrs. Chen cleared her throat. Lost her own mother at a young age and understands what Miss Sophia is going through. Her references say she has a gift for connecting with troubled youth. The last thing he wanted was someone trying to psychoanalyze his family's situation or pushing unwanted emotional healing. The credentials of the other candidates are more impressive. But if she's some new-age therapist disguised as a tennis coach, the interview ends immediately. Marcus deliberately scheduled a conference call for the same time, having no intention of participating in the interview process. Mrs. Chen could handle the vetting, and he'd sign the contract once she'd made her selection. But at 2:45, his call was unexpectedly canceled when the other party's CEO was rushed to the hospital with chest pains. Marcus found himself with an unexpected break in his schedule, and curiosity, an emotion he'd thought dead, began to gnaw at him. Who was this Amber Sterling that Mrs. Chen seemed so convinced would be perfect for Sophia? Amber Sterling was not what he'd expected. Instead of the severe, athletic build he'd imagined, she possessed a natural elegance that immediately filled the space around her. Auburn hair caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the entrance, creating a halo effect that made her seem almost ethereal. Her face held classical beauty, high cheekbones, full lips curved in a warm smile, and eyes the color of honey that seemed to take in everything with genuine interest. She wore a simple white tennis dress that suggested athleticism without sacrificing femininity, and when she moved, it was with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in her own skin. But it wasn't her physical beauty that stopped Marcus in his tracks. It was the way she immediately connected with Mrs. Chen, asking about the flowers in the entryway and complimenting the home's architecture with sincere appreciation rather than calculating assessment. "Blackwood," she said, turning those honey-colored eyes on him with a smile that seemed to light up the entire foyer. "I'm Amber Sterling. Thank you so much for considering me for Sophia's training." Marcus found himself momentarily speechless, a sensation he hadn't experienced since his college days when Elena had first smiled at him across a crowded lecture hall. "I know how busy you must be, but I'd love to meet Sophia if she's available. I always like to get a sense of a student's personality before we discuss training plans." Most of the trainers he'd interviewed for various activities over the years had been more interested in discussing their fees and schedules than actually meeting their potential student. Amber's priority seemed genuinely focused on Sophia's needs. "Chen can show you up." He wasn't parents. He was just parent, singular, a fact that had haunted him every day for 3 years. But something in Amber's expression suggested she understood the weight of that distinction without him having to explain it. "Of course," he heard himself saying, though he'd sworn to avoid any involvement in this process. She moved with quiet confidence, taking in her surroundings without the calculating assessment he'd grown accustomed to from business associates. Instead, she seemed genuinely interested in the family photos lining the hallway, slowing slightly at a picture of Sophia and Elena taken at a tennis tournament 2 years before the accident. Elena was the athlete in the family, he found himself saying. Sophia gets all her natural ability from her mother. He pushed open the door to find his daughter sprawled across her bed, earbuds in, staring at her phone with the glazed expression of someone desperately trying to escape their own thoughts. "She's a tennis coach, and we thought you might be interested in taking some lessons." The defensive hostility that had become her default expression softened slightly, replaced by cautious curiosity. "It's from a few years ago." Sophia's voice trailed off, and she shot a quick glance at her father. "The lessons she taught you, the way she showed you to hold the racket, the strategy discussions, all of that stays with you forever." There was something about Amber's approach that felt natural rather than forced, respectful rather than intrusive. But sometimes when we're ready, those same activities can become a way to feel close to them again. There's no rush to figure out which one tennis is for you. He found himself studying Amber's face, wondering what experiences had given her such insight into grief and healing. "The afternoon light is perfect for tennis." He'd avoided this part of the property since her death, but something compelled him to witness this first session. But as he watched Amber gently guide his daughter through basic warm-up exercises, he found himself genuinely engaged for the first time in years. Instead of bombarding Sophia with technical instructions, she focused on rebuilding the girl's comfort with simply being on a tennis court. They started with gentle rallies, Amber consistently placing the ball in easy-to-reach spots while offering encouraging comments about Sophia's natural form and improving rhythm. "I can see your mother taught you well. You've got that same fluid motion I remember from watching her play." No one had spoken positively about Elena's influence on Sophia in months, as if mentioning her might cause additional pain. But Amber seemed to understand that ignoring Elena's impact would be far more harmful than celebrating it. His daughter began to smile. Not the polite, practiced expression she used in social situations, but genuine joy bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her. When she executed a particularly nice cross-court shot, she actually laughed out loud, a sound that sent chills down Marcus's spine. Amber's own joy was infectious. She celebrated every small victory with authentic enthusiasm, offered gentle corrections without criticism, and somehow maintained a perfect balance between challenge and encouragement. Her movements on the court were poetry in motion, economical, graceful, and incredibly skilled. It was the way she seemed to truly see Sophia, not as a broken child to be fixed, but as a young woman with tremendous potential who simply needed the right guidance to rediscover her own strength. After an hour of play, they concluded the session with both participants glowing with exertion and happiness. Marcus watched from the terrace as Amber and Sophia chatted animatedly while collecting tennis balls, their conversation too distant for him to hear, but their body language speaking volumes about the connection they'd already formed. Sophia called up to him, her voice carrying more energy than he'd heard in years. "Did you see that backhand winner I hit down the line?" "So," Amber said as they reached the terrace. "How did that feel, Sophia? There was something about her presence that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, warm, natural, and absolutely essential after too long in darkness. Amber would begin regular sessions the following Tuesday, with the understanding that they'd evaluate Sophia's progress after a month and adjust the schedule as needed. Her fees were remarkably reasonable considering her qualifications, and Marcus found himself wondering if she understood her own value in the marketplace. As Amber prepared to leave, Sophia surprised everyone by initiating a hug, the first physical affection Marcus had seen her offer a stranger in years. The gesture seemed to move Amber deeply, and she returned the embrace with obvious warmth. "Thank you," Sophia whispered, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. "This was exactly what I needed." As she loaded her tennis bag into the trunk, he found himself reluctant to see her leave. "She's a remarkable young woman, Mr. Blackwood. She just needs reminding of who she was before grief convinced her she was someone else." "Marcus," she repeated, and something about the way his name sounded in her voice made his pulse quicken. "I'll see you Tuesday." For the first time in 3 years, he found himself looking forward to something other than the end of another day. Tuesday suddenly seemed very far away. She talked about tennis technique, asked questions about professional players, and even mentioned the possibility of trying out for her school's team next spring. Marcus found himself engaged in actual conversation with his daughter for the first time in months, drawn out of his emotional hibernation by her renewed enthusiasm. "She thinks with some work, I could be competitive at the junior level." He realized how little he actually knew about Amber Sterling beyond her impressive tennis credentials. Where had she trained? What brought her to private coaching? And how did someone so young possess such wisdom about loss and healing? Over the next few days, Marcus found his thoughts returning to their new tennis coach with surprising frequency. He caught himself wondering what she did between lessons, whether she enjoyed the same books or movies he did, how she'd developed such extraordinary empathy for grieving families. The curiosity felt foreign after years of emotional numbness, but not unwelcome. He positioned himself in his study, which offered a clear view of the tennis court through floor-to-ceiling windows, and tried to focus on quarterly reports while waiting for Amber's arrival. Marcus watched from his window as she emerged, once again struck by her natural grace and understated beauty. Today, she wore navy blue tennis attire that complemented her auburn hair, and when she smiled at Mrs. Chen in greeting, Marcus felt that same flutter of attraction he'd experienced during their first meeting. The two embraced briefly, a gesture of friendship that had developed naturally from their first session, before heading to the court together. Amber worked with Sophia on footwork, teaching her to read ball trajectory and position herself for stronger shots. Marcus found himself drawn into watching despite his intention to focus on work, fascinated by Amber's teaching methodology and his daughter's obvious improvement. But it was more than the tennis instruction that captured his attention. Amber had an extraordinary ability to weave life lessons into sports coaching, using metaphors about persistence, recovery from mistakes, and finding strength in unexpected places. Marcus realized she wasn't just teaching Sophia tennis. She was helping rebuild the girl's confidence and resilience. Life knocks us sideways, but that doesn't mean we can't still make something beautiful happen. How long had he been simply enduring rather than truly living? Their body language suggested they were discussing more than tennis techniques, and Marcus felt a strange combination of gratitude and envy. Gratitude that someone had connected with his daughter so naturally, and envy that he'd lost the ability to engage with Sophia so effortlessly. When they finally made their way back to the house, both women were glowing with the satisfaction of productive work. Sophia immediately launched into excited recounting of her progress, while Amber listened with the same attention she'd given during their playing session. "Dad, Amber says I'm ready to start working on my serve next week," Sophia announced. "She thinks I could develop a really strong overhead game." "I'd love to show you some of the drills we've been working on," Amber said to Marcus. "Sophia's improvement has been remarkable, and I think you'd enjoy seeing her progress firsthand. I'd really like to show you what I've learned." But looking at Sophia's eager face and Amber's gentle smile, he found himself nodding. Every surface, every angle, every shadow held memories of Elena. Her competitive laughter, her graceful movement, her patient instruction as she taught Sophia the fundamentals of the game they both loved. But instead of the crushing pain he'd expected, Marcus found himself surrounded by something different. The memories were still there, still poignant, but they were softened by the joy of watching Sophia reclaim her mother's legacy. Amber seemed to understand the complexity of his emotions without requiring explanation, offering gentle commentary that honored Elena's influence while celebrating Sophia's individual growth. "Your mother would be so proud of how you're developing your own style," Amber told Sophia, as the girl executed a particularly impressive rally. "You're taking everything she taught you and making it uniquely yours." It was exactly what Elena would have wanted, for Sophia to honor their shared love of tennis while becoming her own player. Somehow, Amber had intuited this without ever having met Elena. Amber's presence created a buffer between him and his grief, allowing him to experience joy without guilt. When Sophia hit a winner that would have made any professional proud, Marcus heard himself cheering with authentic enthusiasm. He called out to Amber, grinning like a proud father rather than the emotionally distant man he'd become. There was warmth there, and curiosity, and something that felt remarkably like attraction. He found himself studying Amber with new awareness, noticing the way she moved with unconscious grace, the way her eyes lit up when she smiled, the way she seemed to bring out the best in everyone around her. After the lesson, as they walked back to the house together, Marcus felt compelled to extend their time together. "Would you like to stay for dinner? Mrs. Chen always makes enough for an army, and I'd love to hear more about your background." Amber shared stories from her tennis career, her transition into coaching, and her philosophy about sports as a vehicle for personal growth. She was articulate, intelligent, and possessed a subtle sense of humor that had both Marcus and Sophia genuinely entertained. Marcus found himself sharing more about his own background than he'd intended. His early struggles building the company, his relationship with Elena, even some of the challenges he'd faced as a single father. Amber listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions, and offering insights that revealed remarkable emotional intelligence. The same qualities that make someone successful in entrepreneurship often translate beautifully to overcoming personal challenges. "Sometimes resilience looks like simply surviving until you're ready to start thriving again," Amber replied gently. "There's no timeline for healing." This woman understood grief in ways that suggested personal experience, yet she radiated warmth and hope rather than bitterness or defeat. She was clearly accomplished and independent, yet possessed a nurturing quality that made everyone around her feel valued and understood. With Sophia, she was encouraging and patient. With Marcus, she was respectful yet warm, maintaining appropriate boundaries while still engaging authentically. When she finally prepared to leave around 9 o'clock, Marcus felt reluctant to see the evening end. Sophia hugged her goodbye with obvious affection, and Marcus walked her to her car once again. "I can't remember the last time we had such an enjoyable dinner conversation. You have a gift for bringing out the best in people. Sometimes they just need someone to believe in it when they can't believe in it themselves." Marcus felt seen in a way he hadn't experienced since Elena's death. Not as a wealthy businessman or a grieving widower or even as Sophia's father, but simply as a man worthy of understanding and care. "Saturday," Marcus confirmed, already counting the hours. 3 weeks ago, he'd been going through the motions of existence, convinced that his capacity for joy had died with Elena. Tonight, he'd laughed until his sides hurt, engaged in stimulating conversation, and felt genuinely hopeful about the future for the first time in years. More unsettling was his growing awareness that his interest in Amber Sterling extended far beyond her effectiveness as Sophia's tennis coach. She was intelligent, compassionate, beautiful, and possessed a rare combination of strength and gentleness that drew him like a magnet. For the first time since Elena's death, he found himself attracted to another woman. Excitement, because Amber awakened feelings he'd thought permanently buried. Fear, because opening his heart again meant risking the kind of devastating loss he wasn't sure he could survive twice. Hope that maybe, just maybe, it was possible to honor Elena's memory while still allowing himself to live fully again. Hope that the best chapters of his life might still be ahead of him rather than behind him. Over the next several weeks, Sophia's tennis lessons became the highlight of Marcus's week. He found excuses to be present for each session, ostensibly to track his daughter's progress, but increasingly because he craved Amber's company. She was unfailingly professional, yet warmly personal, maintaining appropriate boundaries while still allowing genuine friendship to develop. The sullen, withdrawn teenager had been replaced by an animated young woman who talked enthusiastically about her goals, both in tennis and in life. She'd rejoined her school's tennis team, made new friends through the sport, and was already discussing college tennis programs. But it was the change in Marcus himself that proved most profound. Amber's presence in their lives had awakened parts of his personality he'd thought permanently lost. He found himself laughing more, engaging more actively with Sophia, and even beginning to consider social activities he'd avoided since Elena's death. Their conversations during and after lessons became longer and more personal. Marcus learned that Amber had lost her own mother to cancer when she was 15, an experience that had shaped her understanding of grief and her commitment to helping others heal through sport. "Tennis saved me," she confided one evening as they lingered on the terrace after Sophia had gone inside to shower. "When I was drowning in sadness, hitting balls gave me something to focus on besides the pain. Eventually, it became my way back to joy. If I can help even one person find their way back to happiness, then everything I went through has meaning." He was beginning to understand that his own grief journey wasn't about forgetting Elena or replacing her memory, but about learning to carry his love for her while still remaining open to new experiences and relationships. Sophia had been invited to a sleepover with her tennis teammates, leaving Marcus alone in the mansion for the first time in months. The solitude, once his preferred state, now felt oppressive. When Amber arrived for Sophia's lesson and discovered the change in plans, she offered to reschedule. "Unless," she said with a slightly hesitant smile, "you'd like some company. I could teach you a few things about tennis. Consider it a gift for being such a supportive tennis parent." She was offering him her time, her attention, her companionship, gifts that had become increasingly precious to him. He was a terrible student, uncoordinated, overeager, and thoroughly out of his element. But her encouraging laughter and gentle corrections made the experience purely enjoyable. "Tennis is about feel and instinct as much as mechanics. Trust your body to find the right motion." He could smell her subtle perfume, feel the warmth of her skin as her hands guided his grip, see the concentration in her honey-colored eyes as she focused on helping him improve. When she looked up and met his gaze, the tennis lesson became irrelevant. "Marcus," she said softly, and he heard everything he'd been hoping for in the way she spoke his name. Her lips were soft and warm, and when she responded by stepping closer and placing her hand on his chest, Marcus felt his heart come back to life after 3 years of hibernation. Amber's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with the same mixture of surprise and rightness that Marcus felt coursing through his veins. They stood there in the afternoon sunlight, tennis rackets forgotten, processing the magnitude of what had just shifted between them. Marcus felt a complex swirl of emotions: desire, hope, guilt, fear. But underneath it all was a sense of profound rightness that he couldn't deny. "This changes things," Amber said finally, her professional instincts reasserting themselves. "She's made incredible progress, and I won't risk that for my own feelings. Continued as we have been, but acknowledged what's developing between us. Sophia doesn't need to know anything until we're both sure about where this is heading. More than I probably should, given our situation. But I also care about Sophia, and I won't do anything that might hurt her recovery. But I can't pretend I don't feel something powerful happening between us." It was a delicate balance, but both were committed to protecting Sophia's progress while honoring their own emotional needs. Longer conversations after lessons, shared glances filled with meaning, brief touches that lingered a moment longer than strictly necessary. Marcus found himself looking forward to Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays with an intensity that had nothing to do with tennis, and everything to do with spending time with the woman who'd awakened his heart. He began leaving the office earlier, engaging more actively in Sophia's activities, and even accepting social invitations he'd declined for years. Elena's memory remained precious to him, but it no longer felt like a prison preventing him from living fully. Sophia, thriving under Amber's continued coaching, remained blissfully unaware of the undercurrents between the adults in her life. Her tennis had improved dramatically, and she'd been accepted to a prestigious summer tennis camp that would prepare her for competitive high school play. More importantly, she'd regained her natural optimism and was making plans for her future with excitement rather than resignation. "Amber says understanding the mental game is just as important as physical technique, and I'd love to help other athletes the way she's helped me." His daughter had not only recovered from her grief, but had found a meaningful direction for her life, inspired by the woman who'd become central to his own emotional renaissance. Marcus had dreaded Christmas since Elena's death, but this year felt different. Sophia was excited about the approaching holidays, making plans with friends and expressing interest in family traditions they'd abandoned since the accident. When Amber mentioned she'd be spending Christmas alone, her father lived across the country, and she preferred to let her students enjoy family time during the holidays. Marcus found himself extending an invitation before he'd fully considered the implications. "Spend Christmas with us," he said after one of their evening conversations. "Sophia would love to have you, and honestly, so would I." Spending Christmas together would represent a new level of intimacy in their relationship, one that would be difficult to hide from Sophia. "I don't want to spend another holiday going through the motions of celebration. I want to actually enjoy Christmas again, and I can't imagine that happening without you there." The evening exceeded Marcus's highest expectations. Amber fit seamlessly into their family dynamic, bringing thoughtful gifts and contributing to the cooking with natural ease. She and Sophia worked together preparing dessert while Marcus handled the main course, and the kitchen filled with laughter and easy conversation. When Amber helped Sophia hang Elena's ornaments on the tree, sharing stories about her own mother's holiday traditions, Marcus felt his two worlds, past and future, blending harmoniously rather than competing for space in his heart. That night, after Sophia had gone to bed, Marcus and Amber sat by the fireplace sharing wine and reflecting on the day. The atmosphere was intimate without being inappropriate, filled with the kind of comfortable closeness that suggested deep emotional connection. "Thank you for today," Marcus said, studying Amber's face in the flickering firelight. "I didn't think I'd ever enjoy Christmas again." When Amber finally retired to the guest room, Marcus lay awake processing the profound shift in his life's trajectory. Sophia was delighted with her gifts, new tennis equipment, jewelry, and books. But her greatest excitement came from sharing the morning with both Marcus and Amber. The three of them opened presents together, prepared breakfast as a team, and spent the day playing tennis and board games with the kind of easy companionship Marcus had thought lost forever. But it was Sophia's parting comment that evening, as Amber prepared to leave, that revealed how much their dynamics had shifted. After Sophia went upstairs, Marcus walked Amber to her car with a new sense of urgency about their relationship. They could no longer pretend that their connection was casual or easily hidden. Sophia was perceptive enough to recognize that something significant was happening, even if she didn't understand the full scope. Marcus asked, though he feared the answer. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to say those words to another woman, but I do. I love your compassion, your strength, your ability to see the best in everyone around you. I love the way you've brought light back into our lives. I love you too, Marcus, more than I ever thought possible. But loving you means loving Sophia too, and I won't do anything that might harm her emotional recovery. Really ready? Because once we cross that line, there's no going back to the way things were." For 3 years, he'd believed that honoring her memory meant preserving everything exactly as it had been when she died. But he was beginning to understand that Elena would want him to be happy, would want Sophia to have joy in her life, would want their family to heal and grow rather than remain frozen in grief. "I think she'd approve of the woman who's helped us remember how to live again." Marcus had prepared carefully, wanting to be honest without overwhelming his daughter with information she wasn't ready to process. "You mentioned that I've been different lately, happier, and you attributed that to Amber's presence in our lives. You're right about that observation." Marcus held his breath, prepared for any reaction from confusion to anger to betrayal. "I could see how you looked at her, how happy you were when she was around. I was worried you were going to let her get away because you thought you weren't allowed to care about anyone besides Mom. Amber is amazing. She's helped me become myself again, and she's helped you become yourself again too. Mom would have loved her." His daughter, wise beyond her years, had understood what he'd been struggling to accept. That loving again wasn't betraying Elena's memory, but honoring the capacity for love she'd helped develop in him. Her response was a mixture of joy, relief, and trepidation, all emotions he understood completely. Marcus arranged for a private dinner at an elegant restaurant, where they could talk freely without worrying about professional boundaries or family complications. The evening felt both entirely natural and thrillingly new. Natural because they'd grown so comfortable with each other over months of friendship, but new because they could finally acknowledge the depth of their connection. "I have a confession," Amber said over dessert, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I was attracted to you from the moment we met. I spent weeks trying to convince myself it was inappropriate and unprofessional. I've been fighting my feelings since that first day when I watched you make Sophia laugh. I knew then that you were going to change everything." She complimented him perfectly, grounding his intensity with her calm wisdom, encouraging his emotional growth while respecting his need to process change gradually. She attended school events, helped with college applications, and provided the kind of female guidance Sophia had been missing since Elena's death. The transition felt natural rather than forced, built on genuine affection and mutual respect. Marcus found himself amazed by his capacity for happiness. He'd believed that losing Elena had broken something fundamental in his ability to experience joy, but Amber had proven that the human heart could expand rather than replace. His love for Elena remained intact, but it no longer prevented him from loving fully again. Sophia's skills had advanced to the point where she was receiving scholarship offers from college programs, and her future in the sport looked bright. More importantly, she'd recovered her natural optimism and was making plans for her life with excitement and confidence. One evening in early spring, as Marcus and Amber sat on the terrace watching Sophia practice serves, she turned to him with a serious expression. "I love Sophia. I love the life we're building together, and I want to make it official. Marcus Blackwood, will you marry me?" She immediately began planning their wedding with the same enthusiasm she'd once reserved for tennis tournaments, insisting on every detail from flowers to music to guest lists. Her joy in their union was so complete, so wholehearted, that any lingering doubts Marcus might have harbored disappeared entirely. The wedding took place in the mansion's gardens on a perfect June afternoon. It was an intimate ceremony attended by close friends, family, and many of the young athletes Amber had coached over the years. Sophia served as maid of honor, radiant in her role as the person who'd brought her father and stepmother together. Amber's vows spoke of family, healing, and the tennis lesson that had become so much more than either of them had imagined. "Today I marry not just the woman I love, but the person who helped me remember who I was meant to be. You and Sophia showed me that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as tennis lessons." Marcus danced with his new wife, with his daughter, and with a heart that felt fuller than he'd ever thought possible again. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Marcus found himself standing with Amber and Sophia on the same terrace where he'd first watched them play tennis together 18 months earlier. The circular journey from that moment of frozen grief to this celebration of new beginnings felt miraculous. "I wasted months fighting feelings I should have embraced from the beginning." She'd not only survived the loss of her mother, but had emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than many adults twice her age. Well, except for Mom, but I think Mom would approve. Marcus felt a moment of perfect peace, as if his first wife was offering her blessing on this new chapter of their lives. A man who'd sworn never to love again had discovered that the heart's capacity for love was infinite. A woman who devoted herself to healing others had found her own family. A grieving teenager had not only recovered her joy, but had gained a mother figure who understood her completely. "I love you, Mrs. Blackwood," he whispered as they settled into bed together. Written. In the distance, the sound of tennis balls being hit echoed from their court. Sophia practicing for her college season, playing the sport that had brought them all together, carrying forward the legacy of love, resilience, and the unshakable belief that even the most broken hearts could learn to soar again.